Thanks so much for tuning in to this discussion about refereed preprints, an emerging scientific communication modality. So as I'm sure you've noticed, preprints are having a moment in time where they're receiving unprecedented levels of attention amid the coronavirus pandemic. Research is being shared using preprints, and commentary on preprints is playing a critical role in informing journals, funders, and general readers of preprints about how these manuscripts can be interpreted. For example, the NIH and IGMS has made a call encouraging readers to add comments to preprints, and a coalition of publishers have released a call for rapid review of preprints as well. Today, in recognition of the fact that there's many different kinds of commentary on preprints, we want to focus on the more formal, organized peer review, which causes the output of a product that we term a refereed preprint, which is the preprint that has appended to it the reviews of reviewers, which is typically constructed during an organized peer review process. Today, we're going to be hearing from a panel kicked off by John Inglis from bioRxiv, who'll be talking about the TRIP initiative. Following that, we'll hear Tomas Lemberger from Review Commons. I should mention that in my role as Executive Director of ASAP Bio, we've been collaborating with EMBO to produce Review Commons. Following this, we'll hear about preprint review from Damien Pattinson at eLife. Kathleen Shear will then talk about a core approach to linking reviews to repositories, and then Gabe Stein from the Knowledge Futures Group will discuss doc maps. And at the end, we'll have a bit of a facilitated discussion. So with that, I would like to hand the microphone over to John.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you to Jessica for the opportunity to participate in this event. I am John Inglis. I'm at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where I have a variety of roles, including the founding of bioRxiv and medRxiv. We're talking about preprints, which I probably don't need to say is a manuscript made public by its author before any process of certification by a journal, usually through peer review, has taken place. A little bit about bioRxiv. It is nearly 7 years old. It has about 89,000 papers, and it's increasing by 3,000 or so papers a month, and it is read very widely. medRxiv is only 1 year old, but it has 8,000 papers, and it is also growing rapidly. Both of these preprint servers are not-for-profit. They're independent of journals and publishers, and they are largely driven by authors' desires. But I put in the phrase responsibly screened because not every paper that is submitted survives the screening process to arrive on our platforms. The goals of these servers are the goals of any preprint server, to accelerate science, to allow feedback, and give scientists, particularly early career researchers, citable and visible evidence of productivity. But the point that we're making in this presentation is that a preprint server allows the uncoupling of the dissemination of new research from its certification by journals. That was Henry Oldenburg's genius to when inventing the concept of the journal, was to couple those two up, and preprint servers are doing a wonderful job of uncoupling those, and that allows innovations in peer review, many of which we're going to hear about today. So our servers have been integrated with peer review from the beginning, and in a survey we discovered that 40% of authors submit to bioRxiv before they submit to a journal, and 40% submit at the same time. We have a variety of journals, 34 of them, that allow authors to simultaneously post their submitted paper on bioRxiv, and that accounts for about 15% of the total that are posted in any month. And we also have a growing number of journals that will consider papers that are sent directly from bioRxiv for peer review, and that is accounting at the moment for about 500 submissions a month. medRxiv has the same manuscript transfer mechanisms, but being newer, the totals are lower. There have been about 1,000 transfers so far. We have launched in a bid to further integrate preprints with journals. We have launched a project we called Transparent Peer Review in Preprints. You're going to hear more from Damien and Thomas about how that works at the publisher level. This is currently a pilot project for 4 publishers, 4 journal publishers and 2 journal independent peer review projects. And in the essence of this, the review, when a paper that is first posted as a preprint on bioRxiv is then submitted to a journal or an independent peer review project, then reviews are commissioned and those reviews are posted back to the preprint on bioRxiv, and this is just beginning on medRxiv. This process operates independently of the preprint platform. The reviews appear in a widget on the paper, but it's the reviewing organization that decides everything about the process, what information is posted, and which papers and at what stage those papers are at when the information becomes public in this way. So currently on bioRxiv, we have 293 papers with trip reviews. They look like this. If you look at the far right of the screen, you see a button, a tab called Peer Reviews. If you click on that tab, it brings into view the reviews that have been posted attached to this particular paper, in this case from Review Commons. As Jessica said, the pandemic has produced a significant change in the view of preprints in the last 6 months. Preprints obviously provide free access to new results a long time, often before those results appear in a journal, but they are preprints and should be treated with caution. And I always love to quote this phrase from Ed Yong, who describes science as moving in slow, erratic stumble towards ever less uncertainty. And in the pandemic, that stumbling of science and the uncertainty of progress has been more public than ever because of this gigantic surge of pandemic-related research, which journals have experienced, but also preprint servers. And here is a chart showing about, I think, 17 or 18,000 pandemic-related preprints and where they have appeared in the range of preprint servers that are available, medRxiv being at the top, bioRxiv about 4 or 5 down. In review, so the need has been, with this deluge of new information, the need has been to identify what is important, what is reliable, and what can be made actionable when it comes to either public policy or patient management. So there's a need for speed. There's also a need for expertise so that there can be some confidence in the assessment. There are a variety of these projects, and I'm quite sure this is an incomplete list. I'm not going to, in the time available, I can't go through each one of these. They are nearly all, at this point, reviews that are not author-initiated, but they are reviews initiated by the project. So they really fall into Jessica's category of commentary and not formal peer review. But I suspect, and maybe the MIT project that we're going to hear about from Gabe, I suspect that we're very soon going to see the emergence of what might be called a true overlay journal, where the author offers her manuscript to the peer reviewing entity, and when it is accepted, that fixes that manuscript as a version of record, and it is indeed published in the way that Henry Oldenburg initially conceived. So those are my remarks. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll hand you back now to Jessica.
Thank you so much, John. Next, I'd like to invite Tomas to talk about Review Commons.
So thank you very much for letting me participate to this panel. My name is Thomas Lemberger. I'm the deputy head of scientific publications at EMBO in Heidelberg, Germany. So good afternoon. This is a beautiful afternoon here, 4 o'clock. So today I'm going to talk about review comments. So what is Review Commons? Review Commons is a peer review platform that runs the peer review before journal submission. So the platform was launched last year in December in collaboration with AzaBio and EMBO. The editorial process of Review Commons is run by EMBO Press, and the platform is now completely free, and it is supported by a grant from the Helmsley Trust. So Review Commons has two major features. The first is that it has a journal independent peer review process. And the second is that we are working with a consortium of 17 journals who are affiliated with the platform. So how does it work? First, the peer review is conducted in a journal independent way. Authors can submit directly a manuscript, like to a normal journal, if you wish, or they can transfer a preprint that has been posted on bioRxiv. And the particularity is that the reviewers of Review Commons are explicitly asked to evaluate the science as it stands, to evaluate its conclusiveness based on the reported evidence, its significance as compared to the current knowledge. But the reviewers do not comment on the potential fit for a specific journal. So this is this journal independent peer review. Once the authors receive the reviews, they have the option to trigger the posting of these reviews and their response to the reviews onto bioRxiv using the TRIP process that John just described. Now, the second part of that process is once the authors have received the reviews, they have the option to transfer the reviewed manuscript together with the response to one of the 17 affiliated journals. And all these journals have agreed not to restart the peer review from scratch, not to recruit a brand new set of reviews and reviewers, but to evaluate the manuscript based on the available reviews that are forwarded by Review Commons. If the first journal does not want to consider the paper, the authors can immediately go to the second, to the third, and to the fourth, etc. So, and finally, when the paper is ultimately published, practically all of the members of the consortium have adopted the editorial transparency, and the paper will be published with the full reviews. So the system of Review Commons, the goal is really to focus the peer review on the science. The papers are evaluated as they stand and not to fit a given editorial bar. It avoids serial re-reviewing cycles with new set of reviewers at each journal. And finally, it provides a mechanism for authors to rapidly disseminate their peer-reviewed study even before submission to the journal. So we are working with 17 journals, all the EMBO Press journals, of course, with eLife, with Rockefeller University Press, with the Journal of Cell Biology, with AAAS, Molecular Biology of the Cell, the Company of Biologists, with most of their journals, and with PLOS journals. As of today, I just checked, I think we have 42 preprints, refereed preprints that have been made public by the authors. 21 papers have been already accepted in one of the 17 journals. We use the TRIP system to post the reviews alongside the preprints. I'm not going to go into the details, but essentially we have developed the technology to automate the transfer from our editorial system onto Hypothesis such that it is completely controlled. The reviews are not altered, are not edited by the authors, and the same things hold for the point-by-point reply from the authors. Now, these reviews that we post on bioRxiv, they are, of course, a very rich resource. They are fantastic analyses, in-depth analysis of the papers. And as John wonderfully explained, in these times of during the pandemic, it has been clear that the rapid dissemination of novel research through preprint have been massively embraced by the community to a scale that we have probably never seen in the life science. And so we have started now to sort of exploit this TRIP process and the hypothesis API to build an integrative platform. We call that the early evidence base. And the idea is to combine the reviews, that is the human expertise that goes into a review, with artificial intelligence to facilitate the browsing of preprints. And I just show, we don't have the time to go into detail, but essentially we can aggregate the reviews that have been posted by TRIP on bioRxiv, the reviews from Review Commons, but also from eLife or EMO-Press, Peerage of Science, across a diversity of such reviewing service, and prioritize the preprint in this way. Another way is to extract by text mining, again using the beautiful text mining resources provided by bioRxiv, to extract hypotheses that have been tested experimentally to allow users to directly find those preprints where these hypotheses and the results, the evidence for these results are presented. So we think that the future of publishing is going to be driven in a very strong way by this association between machine learning, between artificial intelligence and the scalability, but this in collaboration with the human expertise, which is of course much deeper at the moment than artificial intelligence, and these two really disseminate not only papers but knowledge in a usable form. So that is what I wanted to share today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Thomas. Next, we will hear from Damien Pattinson, who will discuss the preprint review project from eLife.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to briefly talk about preprint review at eLife, which is a project that we've been running for a few months now. We announced it late last year as an extension of the work that we've been doing to try and experiment with peer review at eLife. We've actually been offering this particular version, preprint review, for a couple of months to all authors. And I thought I'd just show you what it looks like, as John has talked about, and Thomas as well, that we're using the TRIP interface at bioRxiv to post reviews alongside the preprint. Now, what's important to note is that if an author participates in preprint review, they do so regardless of the outcome of their paper. So that when they submit it to us, we will, and opt in, they essentially agree that the reviews will be posted on bioRxiv, regardless of whether eLife ends up publishing the paper. So that's quite a big difference from Review Commons and from I think other approaches like this. And it does require a bit of a sort of leap of faith for authors, because they have to sign up to something in the knowledge that they may not end up being published in eLife, the journal. So the process is essentially, the standard process for us is that you submit to eLife, you submit, and then we go through a editorial triage step. I think about 70% of papers are rejected at this point, and those that pass editorial triage go to full review to our consultative peer review process, and then if successful, get published in the journal. Preprint review is quite different in that we, oh sorry, I should also mention that we do encourage all our authors. In fact, you have to opt out now from posting a preprint on bioRxiv when you submit to eLife. So one of the first questions we ask is, would you like to post this as a preprint? And in fact, now that is something that they have to opt out of if they don't wish to. And as a result of that, about 70% of our manuscripts get posted as preprints whilst they're under review. But preprint review is a bit different in that you upload first, and then when you submit, we bypass the triage step. So as an incentive to authors to participate in this process, we'll say that we won't do a kind of desk rejection evaluation of their manuscripts. It will go straight for peer review. Those that are successful are then revised and end up published in the eLife journal, and that the reviews are published on bioRxiv. And similarly, if we decide not to publish the paper, we will still post those reviews on bioRxiv. In those cases, we give the authors 3 weeks to actually post a rebuttal, so that when the reviews are posted on the preprint, they will have the opportunity to give their feedback on the rebuttal to that process. So it's quite different. It's a bit of a it's asking quite a lot of authors to be willing to participate in something that may lead to them having negative reviews published on the article. And as a result, the opt-in has been relatively low. It's about 7%, which works out about just short of 150 papers. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of information on the uptake. For preprint review, it's about 1/3 neuroscience, and that corresponds to, for all submissions to the journal, about 1/4 of neuroscience. So we have a slightly higher number of neuroscientists willing to participate in preprint review, and the computational biologists are also kind of more willing to take this route compared with this the sort of emphasis on cell biology that we have across the journal. But generally, there is a fairly reasonable match between overall number of submissions and the kinds of papers that we're receiving on preprint review. We also ask authors why they agree or disagree to participate in the process. So for those who say that they don't wish to do so, only about 20% of them do so because they are concerned about having their reviews posted publicly. The bigger issue is one around concern over preprinting in general. And so, a lot of the people who say no do so because they either don't want to publish in a preprint at all, or they've already published in a different preprint and therefore wouldn't qualify for this. So it's interesting that not a huge number of people are withdrawing because of this concern over public peer review. Similarly, the ones who say that they will participate, we ask them why, and only 11% do so because of this opportunity of bypassing triage. The bigger reason that we receive is because they support the transparency of the process and open science in general. Some say because it's faster, some because the reviews will be better quality, because obviously they're all posted publicly, some for convenience. So in fact, quite a low percentage are participating because of this incentive that we've given them to bypass editorial triage. Of course, this is all self-reported, and so the actual reasons may be slightly different. I just wanted to very briefly talk about some technology that we're building to support this. Similar to EMBO, we're also a technology organization, and we are trying to build infrastructure that better supports these kinds of behaviors. And this is a site that we've been working on that essentially displays preprints, but has the reviews very much kind of built into them, so that you can, alongside the preprint, you can also see the review that's happened. We have eLife, but actually there are other communities who are participating in this. And you can see that we're starting to experiment with tagging these preprints so that you can actually see the number of reviews they've had and also the endorsement. So endorsement for eLife means that we've published the article in the journal, but you can imagine other communities coming in and choosing to endorse a paper for other reasons. And so perhaps societies may say that this is of interest to their particular readers and choose to endorse it. So you can sort of imagine a world where you could have multiple endorsements on a single preprint. And again, that's something that isn't possible in the existing journal structure, where you essentially have to go to one journal, and if you get published there, then you can't get any other endorsements. We're also trying to reflect that in the search, and so this is an example of a search page where we are displaying both reviews and also these endorsements, so that when you actually search for preprints on bioRxiv, you can then start to see which ones have been reviewed and which ones have been endorsed. So to us, it's kind of moving towards this world that we wish to see, where everything is posted immediately as soon as it's ready. The review is done publicly, and then the journals have the role of curators, where they come in and they curate the work that they think is of interest to their readers. And again, it's sort of separating the process, as John mentioned, from the kind of evaluation and the endorsement. And we think there's a lot of exciting things that could happen in that new world. Okay, and I'll stop there. So pass back to Jessica. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. So that was a great overview of two different projects from EMBO and eLife that create refereed preprints on bioRxiv using this hypothesis-enabled TRIP platform. In the next talk, we're going to be hearing about a more general approach that could be used to link preprints and reviews across a variety of different platforms. So I'd like to hand it over now to Kathleen Shearer from CORE.
Well, thanks everybody, and thanks Jessica for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm going to turn off my video actually because I'm in the country and I want to make sure you can hear my voice well. So, and now I've lost my screen there. So yeah, thanks again for inviting me, and I'd like to present some work that we've been doing at CORE to develop a generic model for overlay services on distributed repository resources. CORE is an international organization, so we have members across all 5 continents, and we represent really the repository community writ large in terms of beginning with institutional repositories, but also increasingly data repositories and domain repositories. And we do a lot of work to advocate for the role of repositories in the scholarly communication system. And you can see from this, this graph of Open Door. Oh, I think I might have been cut off. This graph of Open Door that there are close to 5,000, over 5,000 repositories included in their directory. And of course, there are many repositories out there that aren't included in this directory yet. So there are a lot of repositories. And one of the things we're really interested in at CORE as an international association is interoperability across these different platforms so that we don't have silos, but that the content in repositories is generally interoperable and that we can build value-added services on top of all of the content in repositories. So a lot of this work began in 2017 when we launched the CORE Next Generation Repository Working Group that did a lot of visioning around what is the future of repositories. And our vision really was to position repositories as the foundation for distributed, globally networked infrastructure for scholarly communication, on top of which layers of value-added services will be deployed, thereby transforming the system, making it more research-centric, open and supportive of innovation, while also collectively managed by the scholarly community. And one of the major use cases that came out of this work was peer review, decoupling, the journal process and building peer review services on top of repositories. And I think something very important about our vision is that we're not talking about building peer review into individual repositories, but we're talking about a very highly distributed environment where peer review services can be decoupled and be undertaken on different resources that are housed and maintained in different repositories. And so I just like to go through quickly the kind of guiding principles behind this, which I think are very important in terms of creating a kind of a better scholarly publishing and scholarly communication environment. One is distribution of control. So we really see the landscape as being very, very distributed in this vision, where institutions mainly, but other organizations are maintaining and preserving the underlying content. It's inclusive and diverse in the sense that all countries should be able to participate in this. It should support different languages, different research priorities. Interoperability, of course, I already mentioned that. We need repositories, preprint servers to behave in a common way. This is all for the public good. intelligent openness, and then sustainability. So this is why we think the distributed environment where institutions are collecting and maintaining content is very important for the long-term sustainability of the system. And then we build the peer review services, which are managed by publishers or by research communities as a layers on top. So to move this use case forward, we had a meeting in January 2020 in Paris, and we brought together a number of projects that were already working on overlay peer review. And Thomas and Jessica were both in attendance at that meeting, and we gathered a number of different use cases. What we have done with those use cases now is to identify a kind of a generic model that could be used to support any repository interacting with any type of peer review service. And that model is using linked data notifications. So very shortly, we will be publishing a paper on the core website that presents this model and asking for community feedback. And I'd just like to mention that it's really my colleagues, Paul Walk, Martin Klein, and Herbert van de Sample, who are doing most of the technical work around this. And as I said, we'll be publishing this for sometime in late July 2020. And again, I think it's really important to bring together all these various initiatives that are working on preprints and overlay peer review to ensure that the technologies and architecture that they're using are interoperable, because that will allow peer review to occur across the preprint repositories. And then just to conclude with some remarks about how we hope this model can be also expanded to include other types of content in repositories. So while we're looking now at the use case of preprints or articles, we'd like to use this model also to begin to do some type of assessment services on other types of content, such as research data, software, and other valuable research outputs that would be contained in the different repositories around the world. And with that, I will stop and say thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. Our final speaker today is Gabe Stein from the Knowledge Futures Group, who I believe will be talking about an additional approach to describing peer review on research objects.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Jessica. You can all see my screen, I think, although I'm going to make it full screen. Be a little bit nicer, maybe. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, and thanks for having me. I am Gabe Stein. I run operations and product at the Knowledge Futures Group. Among other projects, we produce PubPub, the open source publishing platform, and a couple other things like the underlay and a new publication we're starting called The Commonplace. But today, I'm actually here to talk about a new initiative that we're starting as a joint effort between the KFG, ASAP Bio, and TU Graz with some generous support from HHMI called Doc Maps. And I'm really excited to talk about this because it actually is in some ways a culmination of all of the projects that have been talked about today and offers a sort of interesting lens for how to think about that. So the idea of Doc Maps actually didn't start with academia, but with news. My background's in news media, and I've been obsessed for a long time with how people trust and process what they read online. And when we were starting to think about Doc Maps, we were thinking about why people trust or distrust certain news brands. And what we realized is that those brands like CNN and New York Times actually stand for a process that goes into news gathering that they've spent decades honing. Things like interview procedures, source verification, fact checking, and stuff like that. But of course, the process is actually pretty opaque. And in reality, there's a huge amount of variance from article to article, from editor to editor, which you can see by looking at tools like NewsDiff, which is what this is, which tracks changes to public articles over time. And it turns out news organizations make enormous changes to articles in real time without really ever telling anybody about that. And of course, there's another problem, which is that it's now pretty trivial for anybody with basic computer literacy to copy the look and feel of trusted brands without actually copying the process. And over the last decade, that's really damaged the credibility of the sort of national news organizations across the world. And hopefully this is starting to remind you of another publishing industry that you know and love. And so when we were thinking about these things, we started thinking, well, what if you could see into the process? What if you could independently verify the process? What if you made that more transparent? What would that look like for news? But more importantly, because we work with scholarly publishers, what would that look like in scholarly publishing? And I think it's interesting to say that if you take a step back today and look at a lot of what's happening to describe the process behind publishing, a lot of which we've heard about today, we're already starting to develop an organic, or quite organically, an ecosystem around how to do this in a healthy and more transparent way. And I think that we have a unique opportunity in this health pandemic and this infodemic crisis to make this ecosystem, to formalize this ecosystem and make it a key part of the future of publishing. So what does that look like? Well, this is a sketch that we did a little over a year ago that sort of just loosely talks about how you could build a sort of distributed review ecosystem, and this sort of evolved into what the DocMaps project is going to be. It has 5 different possible actors. You have someone who hosts a paper, you have someone who reviews a paper, you have someone who provides a badge, although I like Damien's term evaluation much better, and this was again written a year ago. You have someone who verifies that evaluation, and then you have these other parties who sort of have their own policies about what different objects constitute an evaluation or a review in their universe. And so, you know, this is just sort of a thought about that we had about a year ago about how something like this could work. But what's really cool is I think most of this ecosystem actually already exists. Like, it exists on this call. We have paper hosters, we have review services, and we even have some folks, you know, like Trip and the Transpose project, which wasn't mentioned, who are really interested in, you know, specific policies for reviews. And so I think that's really cool. And then I want to mention one other thing too, which is our own efforts in this space. This is the Rapid Reviews COVID-19 journal, which is launching from the MIT Press on PubPub, and we're going to be doing you know, reviews on top of preprints with the ability to publish them in a journal if the author wants to after that. But also what we're doing in terms of infrastructure for this is we're building the ability to create reviews and deposit them to Crossref into PubPub, which then anybody who uses PubPub, and it's a free open source tool, will be able to do. And so I think that's a big core part of the infrastructure. But I think this ecosystem that's developing with all of these tools is actually missing maybe 2.5 key pieces, and that's exactly where the DocMaps project comes in. The first key piece is, of course, machine readability and interoperability, and Kathleen touched on that a little bit, and I think and hope that Core is going to be part of some of these discussions. But we think this is really, I think this is really important to have in this ecosystem for 3 reasons. First, of course, so that we can computationally verify reviews that they happened and who did them. Second, so of course we can interoperate and combine different processes from different sources, and that way this distributed ecosystem stops wasted effort. Multiple people don't have to do the same types of reviews, but also we get better and more diverse signals of quality if we can stack different processes on top of each other. And then the final reason, and I think perhaps the most important, is that we really should be able to get more details about the process. We're going to be designing these doc maps to scale from a mere assertion that a review happened to adding details about the review criteria from taxonomies like the one being developed at the STM Association, and even if you have the data to, you know, specific changes and reviewers and you know, even like a public changelog of the document if you want to go that far. But this raises another question. And the other one that I think we'll be looking at as part of the DocMaps project, which is if we start publishing all of this data, how do we make it discoverable? This is, I think, ultimately where we all want to end up. And I swear Damien and I didn't coordinate on this, and this aggregation tool, which looks exactly like eLife's tool, was done a year ago before I'd ever seen that, but it shows that we're all sort of thinking in the same direction, which is really exciting. I think this is ultimately where we want to get to, is something like this, where you can post an evaluation of any research output, no matter if it's preprint or a data set or even an article in a traditional journal that's already gone through a peer review process, you can post that evaluation really anywhere you want. You can allow others to find it very quickly, no matter where they are, and use it in their own review processes. And then other people can build on top of this infrastructure and build things like the eLife aggregator or all kinds of things we can't even think about yet. And so, obviously, I think Core also is doing a lot of thinking about how this infrastructure works, but the point of the DocMaps project is to ask these questions and bring together a group of technologists and publishers and reviewers and other stakeholders in the space to sort of answer a lot of these open questions and come up with recommendations, best practices, and potentially even some initial, actually built experiments to answer some of these questions and to take this ecosystem that I think is already organically evolving from the ground up, formalize it a little bit, and make it a huge part of the future of publishing. So we're going to be convening a technical committee to talk about a lot of these things in the coming months. And if you're interested, please reach out and join us.
Thanks so much, Gabe. So we have now heard from a variety of different projects that kind of span from the practical application of referee preprints to more expansive projects thinking about how this approach can be generalized. I now would like to move into a little bit of a discussion session to talk about, to ask the panelists their opinions on 3 different topics. So let's begin with the first question. Certainly, as we were thinking about review commons, one of the concerns that we heard was of authors wondering whether going through review on a preprint would then duplicate effort that would be occurring later at a journal. So will this phenomenon of referee preprints help publishing to become more efficient, or will it duplicate effort? I would like to ask any of the panelists who might have an opinion on this to weigh in.
Well, maybe I can start, but I'm sure we can all amplify. So the goal is precisely to reduce the duplication of effort. I think the current system involves enormous, not duplication, but triplication or quintuplication. And so just to be clear, the usual history of a paper now is that it is submitted to journal number 1, usually a very selective journal. It doesn't go through after peer review, and the paper is going to be resubmitted to journal number 2, who is going to select a new set of reviewers. A couple of weeks later, the paper might be rejected again, and so on, 2, 3, 4 cycles, each involving 3 reviewers on average. Every reviewer, we know they take something like between 5 and 8 hours. So let's say 25 hours per cycle. So something like 100 to 150 hours of peer review for one paper. And I think that's the major source of inefficiency, one of the major source of inefficiency in the peer review. And it's exactly against this redundancy that we are trying to fight by having one set of reviews, and these reviews concentrate really on the science, and then the editors of every journals can use this. And we thought a long time how to formulate these reviews in a way that they can be used by very different journals. And in principle, 5 or 17 journals can use these reviews to find a home rapidly to this review. So that's really one of the core idea of this entire sort of preprint. And I think probably all of us, this is what we want to achieve, that with one set of review, you can find rapidly a home in a journal with this dissociation between evaluating the science, its significance, and so on and so on. And then the curation certification part that is done by the journals. And this is really the role of the journals is in fact glorified, if you want, but it is much clearer who is doing what.
I just wanted to, I totally agree with all of that. I think what's interesting about the way that this is moving on to the kind of third-party peer review is moving on to preprints is that it does, I think, reduce the the sorts of duplications that we would see. So when my previous role at Research Square, we ran Rubric, which was another third-party peer review system. And it was ultimately sort of difficult to get traction with authors because we would send a review to a journal, and they would look at the reviews and say that this looks great, now we're going to send it for peer review. And so essentially it would not save any time. But because now these reviews can be posted on preprints, then it means that they are available for everyone to see. And I think that is a kind of a huge incentive for journals to actually use them directly rather than sort of discard them and just do their own thing. So I think the combination of third-party peer review probably needed preprints to really work, and I think Review Commons is a great example of how that's happening.
Maybe I can add that it remains a challenge, and I think there is an inherent conservatism after so many years where reviewers, we were all trained to evaluate a paper as a reviewer as a function of the journal where it is considered and so on. So there is a part of education and rethinking about how peer review is being done and written and reported that doesn't go just without effort. So I think there is a given education to achieve to have the reviewers commenting on the science, and then the journals looking at this evaluation and making a decision, a curation decision, which sometimes is difficult to do. And so I think it sort of refocuses the roles of editors and reviewers, in my opinion, in a way that is very constructive for science.
Thanks. If I may just interrupt here for one moment just to ask, I realize that we are after our originally scheduled time. Is everyone okay to stay on for another few minutes to continue the conversation? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you both. The next question that I'd like to raise is, how can the nuances of all these different review approaches be communicated to readers? So we heard about 2 examples in this session. Damien has just mentioned Rubric. There are now existing 2 other similar projects called Peerative Science and Peer Community In, which both take their own approaches as well and provide reviews on preprints. They offer different options to authors. And in addition to that, John mentioned a variety of projects that are perhaps structured in different ways, but that also provide a rich output on preprints, for example, pre-review. So there is really a lot of potential for, I think, confusion among authors and readers about what the different processes are. I think that Gabe clearly has one solution for us, but how can the nuances of these different approaches be communicated most clearly to readers?
I can start with a thought, which is, I think so. We've been thinking a lot about how you capture different processes in machine readable ways that go beyond, by the way, academic review, where we really are thinking about news and about other communities where the process that goes into creating a document is really important for trust and for for understanding. And the conclusion we've come to is it's possible to have something that's flexible enough to capture all of those nuances, but it's impossible to communicate it without human intervention. And I think that the point of sort of having those different layers that I showed in sort of how we're thinking about how DocReps can be used is that at some level, you do have to have communities of people who can come in and as Thomas was describing and as Damien was describing, who can come in, look at all of the different evaluations, and then make decisions about what that means to them. And so I don't think and then display basically the sort of sum of the nuance that basically led to their evaluation and led to their decision. And so I don't personally think that there is a perfect way to communicate all of the nuance to readers, and I don't think that there's certainly a way to do that in a perfectly taxonomical or consistent approach. But I do think that if we can make everything transparent enough, we can allow different people to communicate those judgments to their communities where it matters for the communities that matter. And the upside to that, I think, is that we can communicate lots of different types of evaluative approaches. So some people can be focused on things like statistical review. Some people can be focused on things, like the quality of the science. Some people can be focused on things like the openness and transparency of the process involved, and all of that can happen. So that's my best answer for it so far.
Jessica, I would endorse everything that Gabe said. I think we are seeing the emergence of the idea of badges of different kinds that indicate different kinds of scrutiny and the level at which a piece of work passes that scrutiny or does not. I think one of the sort of fundamental issues, though, in this emerging world of evaluation, or assessment is the word I usually use, is the difference between a voluntary act on the part of an author and the involuntary consequence of posting your work on an open server like a preprint server. And we are still working our way through those two distinctions. And I mentioned Oldenburg because he 400 years ago, consecrated the notion that dissemination takes place after this certification process. And in all the discussion in the past few years about refereeing preprints, we've run into a lot of confusion about the difference between peer reviewing something and certification as a journal typically does it. And the sort of canonical idea of journal certification is that this manuscript is now fixed. We call it a version of record. It is the thing that people cite and the thing that people refer to. That idea of the version of record is also being blurred in the current discussion. But to me, the fundamental process is whether an author decides that she wants her manuscript to be evaluated by a particular organization, or is it a question of simply looking at how the community responds to that particular piece of work. And that's a nuance that I think we are not communicating very clearly right now. And I think that perhaps is only going to get more confusing as we elaborate this ecosystem of badging and other forms of evaluation, as Gabe described.
And may I just add that it's so different depending on the different domains and the way review is undertaken and what different communities are comfortable with. So I think it would be really difficult to standardize the language around that. But I do think there will be some vocabularies that we develop. I hope some common vocabularies we develop around the different nuances of peer review that we can use.
Thank you. And final question, what will be the impact of referee preprints on journals? Clearly, some of these initiatives are very closely tied with journals, but if we can look into the future, what will the impact of this form of communication be on the larger ecosystem?
Shall I start? I think it will have a big impact. As I said in my talk, I do think that journals' role will become much more of a kind of curation one, perhaps, and less involved with peer review. I do think journals have a very important role to play in, in highlighting research to its particular readers and the community that it represents. So I think that can be the role that that is likely to happen in the future. But I think there is this separation occurring, and I think it will continue to happen between the sort of evaluation of the science and the evaluation of the sort of interests and scope and so on. So I think that seems to be fairly inevitable.
Yeah, I'll just add too, from the perspective of working very closely with MIT and UC Berkeley to set up this rapid reviews journal, which is going to be an overlay journal, there have been a lot of questions in those discussions about what it means to have a journal that is mostly providing reviews on top of preprints. And I think the conclusion that everybody's coming to is we don't know, but we have to be willing to experiment with these new approaches. But one thing that has become clear early on is that, and I talked a lot about brand and trust in my talk, but having the name of a journal on this seems to matter already, because sort of the MIT Press is behind it, and because UC Berkeley is behind it. Authors have been submitting their preprints directly to the editors of this journal because of that authority. So there's something there that we're still not. I don't know what the answer to it is or what it is, but there's something about the authority of those names that still matters. And I certainly think that, maybe as Damien and John have suggested, it goes more towards that curatorial angle of things. But having a real brand that does seem to matter, at least in the early days. And I think will continue to, and we need to figure out what that is and untangle it and sort of work to understand the relationship between the journal brand and the actual process.
I mean, a huge part of this has to be a consideration of careers in academia, where there is an enormous amount still of signaling of journal brand as a talisman of quality, and that's an enormous problem. It's been identified for many years, and overcoming it is a huge task. We could perhaps see the small green shoots of that kind of change in the kind of processes that we are talking about here, but we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of changing hearts and minds in terms of career development, whether it's the person whose career it is, or the people who is evaluating that person.
For the influence on the journals, I think if we are successful in running this peer review in a journal independent way, as we sort of aim for, I think the influence can be very beneficial for journals, because they will really be able to show very clearly what is their contribution in terms of curation, in terms of evaluation. It really requires, it is a high bar for the journals to do that type of work, because they cannot sort of delegate a decision to others. They have to make the decisions by themselves, and it requires very strong editors who can read the science, who understand the science and the arguments in a peer review to finally make a decision. So I think for some journals it may turn difficult, but for those journals who will be able to make these strong decisions and curation, I think they are going to be strengthened in their task. So I'm quite optimistic. Of course, it depends if we can do this peer review in a journal independent way. If it's specific to a journal, I see a little bit less impact. I think it's an extension of transparency, which is of course very beneficial, but it might be less profoundly transformative than if we really do this decoupling than John that John described in the introduction.
Yeah, I have to agree with what everyone said, and I think, to go back to what Damien said, I think potentially this could have a really big impact on journals. And we've been working with Timothy Gowers, who's a Cambridge mathematician who has an overlay journal on arXiv. And essentially it has cut out all of the processes where you have to submit the article, go through the editorial process, and so on. And so it's a very lightweight process that they undertake when they're publishing articles that are housed somewhere else. So I think from a technical perspective also, it changes the kind of workflow for journals as well.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just something that just came up out of what Thomas said and you said, Kathleen, we are really advocating at the end of the day, if this works out well, for increasing the amount of at least visible complexity in the peer review process by orders of magnitude, because all of this stuff will now be accessible and will come from lots of different sources and be very diverse. And that gets even more complex if we talk about sort of exploding what the article means too, which is another conversation that I know a lot of us are involved in. But there's a huge and hard and valuable and important job to be done in helping to manage that complexity, which is, I think, could be the role of the journal going forward. And so, Thomas, as you're pointing in that direction, I just can't help but think that you're right, and that there actually is a very exciting opportunity to manage the explosion of complexity that we're all advocating for. That it proves to be extremely valuable and good for healthy for the ecosystem.
All right, any final comments?
Or just maybe in conclusion, I think it might have a beneficial impact on journals, preprint, but I think the key is whether it's beneficial for science. And I think we're all very optimistic for that.
Thanks, Tomas. That is a wonderful note to end this session. I'd like to say thank you first to SSP for allowing us to have this forum, to all of the panelists for their presentations and this conversation, and finally to everyone watching this recording. Take care.